In early June 1967, tensions in the Middle East were rising. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser had called on the Arab nations to destroy Israel. War seemed inevitable. Israel faced the grim prospect of a simultaneous invasion from Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. The combined Arab armies had a massive superiority in numbers of soldiers, tanks, and fighter aircraft. Despite this less intense preparation, on Sunday, May 14, 1967, Egypt made its move. President Nasser deployed his troops in the Sinai Desert and then closed the Straits of Tiran. Israel's access to the Red Sea was cut. The Middle East was on the brink of war. On the morning of Monday, June 5, 1967, Israel fired the first shots in what would be the Six-Day War. Egypt was hit by a massive preemptive airstrike. Squadrons of Israeli jet fighters swooped down. The Egyptian Air Force was caught cold. In the first wave of attacks, 11 air bases were obliterated. The Israeli plan of targeting runways first had worked perfectly. Egyptian aircraft were sitting ducks.
By 11:35 Cairo time, 250 Egyptian aircraft had been destroyed. 100 of Egypt's 350 pilots were killed. By noon on the first day of the war, Israel had absolute air supremacy over Israeli, Egyptian, Jordanian and Syrian airspace. The Israeli Air Force could now be devoted almost exclusively to providing close air support to the ground forces fighting into.
Once air superiority had been gained, with the air flank open to them, they could use aircraft in a close air support role. They could actually support the advancing infantry and armour. They could interdict the enemy as he reinforced or tried to withdraw. They could also transport logistics using the air flank, and of course could also importantly drop airborne forces. So that package, that air superiority package, gave the Israelis the sort of flexibility that they needed at very many different levels.
כמו שרצית טל, מול האויב הגחנו, מי שנפל נפל, על הנופלים פסחנו, רצנו קדימה טל, בחמישי ביוני, גדוד השריון פרץ, הקרב יצא באש ודם.
During the retreat across the Sinai, the Egyptians suffered thousands of casualties and lost hundreds of tanks.
איש את ליבו ישאל מי יכסה עינינו ביח קרבות אותל את הנופלים נניח הם לא יודעים אבל אנו אחרי רפיח הם לפנינו טל בחמישי ביוני גדוד השריון פרץ באש ודם אל הקרב יצא באש ודם את פניו מצא
15,000 Egyptians were killed or wounded in 4 days of fighting. 5,000 soldiers were captured, along with 500 of their officers.
And she sent her prisoners back home, across the canal, to Egypt.
80% of Egypt's military hardware had been captured, including hundreds of tanks and hundreds of guns. Israel had lost 300 killed and over 1,000 wounded. It took 4 days of the Six-Day War for the Israelis to overrun the Egyptian army in the Sinai.
By 1 o'clock on Friday morning, the eastern bank of the Suez Canal and the Gulf of Tiran were in Israeli hands. Egyptian towns now suddenly became frontier positions.
The Six-Day War, third of 5 Arab-Israeli wars. A conflict whose outcome was made inevitable by air power on the first day. A war fought on 3 fronts, each quite different. The Sinai Desert, scene of dramatic tank battles and the destruction of an entire army.
Today we confronted the air forces of Egypt, Syria, Jordan and Iraq. In this battle we have destroyed approximately 400 enemy planes. 4 things made this aerial campaign as successful as it was. 1. The intelligence. 2. The planning. 3. The central control. And 4th, and most importantly, the execution. The outstanding performance of our pilots.